In this lesson, we're going to start chapter 27, talking about the rise of animal diversity. A few fun facts to know about animals. There are presently over 1.3 million named species of animals. However, there could be up to 8 million animal species in existence. So the discrepancy in those numbers tells you that there's still much to learn about the living world of animals. Let's start with our phylogenetic tree that we've been following throughout the course as we've learned about the different groups of organisms and how they thought to start from the earliest known life form to the different groups we've been talking about. The bacteria would have been the first domain to evolve, then later the archaea and the eukarya, which are more similar to each other, or they're known as sister clades compared to bacteria, which is the outgroup. So as we've been following that eukarya domain, that branch we saw divide further into the 4 supergroups: Excavata, the Sarclad, Archaeplastida, and Uniconta. And we have already studied the protists, the fungi, and the land plants. So that brings us to our final group or kingdom of animals, which belong to the Uniconta supergroup, along with some protists, fungi, pardon the beep there, along with some protists, fungi, and the choanoflagellates, which interestingly, if you recall, we talked about them when we learned about the protists. This is a group of protists, and they are the most similar other clade of eukaryotes to animals. So what this represents here is that that branch where they both diverged from would be the single-celled eukaryote that is their common ancestor, the most recent common ancestor of the present-day choanoflagellates and animals. So now if we carry out that branch of the phylogenetic tree where we saw the animals, and we see how it further can be broken down into additional groups. That first branching off here would represent the common ancestor of all living animals that lived around 700 million years ago. Now, unfortunately, there are no fossils to support this that can be dated back to 700 million years ago. Instead, we have fossil evidence, not traditional fossils, my apologies, fossil steroids of sponges, which the fossil evidence for that is actually biochemical. It's not a fossil in the traditional sense of what you think of a fossil, like the preserved remains of an organism or the cast and mold of an organism, of the hard parts. In addition, there are molecular clock studies that utilize DNA to deduce how long ago the animals started existing on the planet. My understanding of this is they look at mutation rates of biomolecules that they see in present day organisms, and they can back calculate, because of the number of mutations and how long these mutations take place in different organisms, they can date back to approximately how long ago those first animals would have existed on Earth. Now, if we fast forward a couple hundred more million years into the closer to present day, but still very long time ago, around 570 to 600 million years ago, during the Proterozoic time period, was the first fossil evidence, the first organisms that the fossil evidence remains. And these fossils are representative of a group of organisms known as I might mispronounce this, Ediacaran fauna. So To learn more about the Ediacaran fauna, there's a video that I'd like you to watch. So you're going to go ahead and pause this lecture now. Watch this YouTube video. The link is here, and it's also on D2L. And while you're watching, I want you to note the characteristics of this group of Ediacaran fauna and give examples of currently existing animals today that we can trace them back to their ancestors that are the Ediacaran fauna that came during this time called the Avalon explosion. In addition, there are some organisms from this time period that we don't see any descendants of them today, and there's characteristics of those Ediacaran fauna that we no longer see in present day animals. So also take note of those characteristics while you're watching the video. And then when you come back, we'll recap what you learned and hopefully you'll see what you came up with as we discuss it in the next slides. So go ahead and pause this, go check out the YouTube video, and then come back. All right, so after watching the video about the Avalon explosion and the Ediacaran fauna, you hopefully learned about some of the characteristics that make this group unique, including the fact that these were the first multicellular eukaryotes which had soft bodies. They did not have a hard skeleton. That will come later. Some of them look like what we now consider sponges and cnidarians and also mollusks, and others were completely strange and like nothing that we see today existing on Earth. The Ediacaran fauna or biota also included the first bilaterians, which are animals that have two openings, a mouth and an anus, where they ingest food, release waste. But there was a diversity of these animals. Some of them were benthic, meaning that they were attached to the bottom, where the seafloor, the substrate, but some were also in the water column, swimming around or floating freely. So again, these are the first fossil animals that we can date back to know that there were certainly animals in existence about 560 million years ago. Even though it is thought that animals evolved before that time, there are no physical fossil remains to prove that. So as we now will continue to study the evolution of animals and what animals exist today, remember how we saw with the Ediacaran fauna some representative ancestors that were similar to modern day sponges, cnidarians, and possibly some other groups. So if you look at the phylogenetic tree, you can see that the first animal group to diverge was the sponges. And then from there, we have the cnidarians and other animal groups that we're going to look at more in detail next time. So as we continue in chapter 27, learning about the different phyla of animals, we're going to go in order of how they are thought to have evolved in the evolutionary timeline. So our next lesson will be on sponges.